I ran over to help Faye. As I did, a huge mass leapt out of the trees and landed in our neighbor's yard, then darted off into the night. Are you out of your fucking mind? Becca shrieked at Faye. Lights flicked on all around us, and concerned neighbors peeked out from their bedroom windows. Faye groaned as I helped her up, but she nearly fell again when I freed an arm to block Becca from coming any closer. Even with her son in hand, Becca looked like she was about ready to break her sister's neck. I guided Faye back to the house. She staggered and stumbled as if she'd never walked a day in her life. She asked, "Did you hear the little birdies? They sing like angels." Back inside, I tended to Faye on the couch while Becca stomped around overhead. Within minutes, Becca descended the stairs, luggage in one hand and Caleb in the other, and summarily, oh my gosh, that's such a weird word, exited the house. It was only after I heard the screeching of tires that I realized she'd driven off in Faye's car. It wasn't long before a police cruiser lit up our driveway. A fist pounded on the door and two burly officers greeted me with stoic gazes. The commotion had upset the lady who lived across the yard. She claimed to have heard one of us rummaging around on her side of the fence. For her sake, I hope she kept her doors locked. The officers were under the impression that a drunken argument had taken place on the back patio, so I went along with it. What else could I have said? I explained that my fiancé had taken too many shots and had started a fight with her sister, and that Becca had stormed off and returned to her hotel. Faye sat up on the couch and woozily reassured the cops that her sister was sober as a judge, and that they need not worry that she was out driving drunk. They asked Faye if she was alright a few times, then eyed me sternly and left. I wanted to scream at Faye. I was so tired of the creature's relentless intrusions, and I felt the urge to blame her. But at the last moment, I held my tongue. Faye looked at me with dripping eyes, and in them I could see a misery more profound than anything I'd been through. Her exhaustion was betraying her. While unconscious, Faye was highly suggestible, almost childlike. The imposter took advantage of this by manipulating her dreams, trying to convince her that he was a friend. The creature was grooming Faye to believe he could take her away to a beautiful place, but in reality, she was being coaxed out of this world. After draping Faye in blankets and securing all the doors and windows, I went upstairs. Thoughts of surrender and death swirled in my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out my phone and called Angela, begging her to come and see with her own eyes what Pale Peak had wrought upon us. She agreed. Faye and I spent Sunday out of the house. We window shopped, saw a movie, and ate at a nice restaurant. I tried my best to cheer her up, but she was still devastated over what happened. Being away from home, however, seemed to distract her, and that night she didn't budge in her sleep. On Monday morning, I woke to find a missed call on my phone. To my surprise, it was Jennifer's second husband, Henry Chauffeur. He sounded old and tired, and not at all happy to inform me that Jennifer had passed away more than 10 years ago. I hit redial and spoke with the receptionist, who reluctantly promised to have the dentist return my call at his convenience. By lunchtime, my phone buzzed again, and a grumpy man interrupted me when I answered. "I'm trying to run a business here, Felix," he said. "I don't need your pictures or your phone calls." "Henry," I pleaded, foregoing the charade about the old photo albums. "I'm sorry about Jennifer, but I need your help. I think what happened to her is happening to my fiancé. Do you understand what I mean?" The man paused in contemplation, as if considering whether to open the old wound of his wife's passing. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said. "The mountain, Henry. The cabin." Henry paused again. "Please," I continued. "I need to know what happened. Jennifer sold that place to my in-laws. Now something terrible is happening to us." "The Spencers," he grumbled. "Yes, their daughters and I stayed at Pale Peak. Now she's losing her mind. Please." "I can't help you," Henry said. "Take her to a doctor. My wife was ill. Plain and simple." "Did she ever do anything unusual?" I asked. "Sleepwalk, hear voices, things like that?" A muffled crackling noise emitted from the phone, as if Henry were trying to crush it in his grip. "Leave me alone," he shouted. "Don't ever waste my time again." The phone clicked, and he was gone. A few hours later, I received a series of text messages from Becca. She had gone to a hotel the night of the incident, then booked an earlier flight back to Arizona. She left the car at the hotel and taxied to the airport. We'd have to go pick it up. Becca's final message read simply, "Ask our mom about 5. She knows." The message infuriated me. I knew Becca was hiding something, but the fact that Lynn bore the knowledge of what drew the imposter to Faye was outrageous. Her duplicity had endangered her own child. I picked up the phone and I called her immediately. When she didn't answer, I called again, and again, and again. After some time, she answered with a frightened, "What do you want?" There was no irritation in her voice, only guilt. She'd lied to me about something in the past, something important, and had been dreading I'd discovered the truth ever since. My words came out sharp and unmeasured. "I flew all the way out there to hear your bullshit." She didn't make a sound. "I took time off work," I continued. "Time I didn't have. I risked my life up at that cabin. And you knew something all along, something you didn't tell me." "I told you everything," Lynn said meekly. The show had ended. She couldn't act anymore. "You know something about that mountain and about Faye and why this is all happening. Why'd you go this far to protect your lies is beyond me. Your daughter's life is in danger. At best, she's gonna end up in a nut house." "No," she replied. "I don't know anything about the mountain, I swear to God. I know bad things happen to Tom and Jennifer, but I don't know what it is. I'm telling the truth, Felix, I swear." "What makes 5? I demanded. "You know what it means. Your daughter draws that number all over everything in her sleep, and she can't remember doing it when she wakes up. You're a liar, Lynn. Look what it's cost us." Lynn whispered something, then I heard Greg's voice. "Oh, just tell him already, for Christ's sake," he grumbled. "He's family. He needs to know." They bickered for a moment, Lynn desperately trying to conceal what she was saying from me. Greg became upset. His voice rose. "You were pregnant, Lynn. Just tell him, okay? She was pregnant, Felix." "You fucking asshole," she yelled. A door slammed and her voice calmed. After a moment, she took a deep breath and said, "Felix, I'm going to overnight a box out to you. Call me when you get it, and whatever you do, keep it between us. Don't let Faye see it. She doesn't need to know." I didn't have time to express my shock. The sound of Greg thumping on the door came through the phone, and then Lynn promptly hung up. Did my stream cut out? I don't think it did. Weird. I think, I guess Twitch went down for a second. That's my mistake. Sorry, you guys. I forget, Streamlabs doesn't tell me when it cuts out. That's so weird. I normally have great Wi-Fi. Anyway. Hiding this revelation from Faye proved to be a difficult task. She was naturally perceptive and could read me like a book, so I decided not to masquerade as long as nothing was wrong. Instead, I pretended to have a bad stomach ache and went to bed early to avoid talking with her altogether. Millions of questions swarmed my mind as I lay in the dark. Did Lynn have a miscarriage? An abortion? Did she give the baby up for adoption? Was it not Greg's child? The possibilities were myriad, and my desire to know kept me awake for hours. A day and a half later, a package arrived in the mail. As I carried it inside, my phone beeped from upstairs. I hid the little box behind the TV stand and raced up to the bedroom, hoping that Nathan had tried to reach out. My heart sped up when I saw the voicemail was from Henry. His melancholy words seeped out of the phone. He slurred and paused from time to time, probably drunk, and seemed on the verge of tears. He apologized for attacking me and proceeded to mumble bits and pieces of a ghastly story. My wife lost her child to cancer, Henry reflected. You never move on from a thing like that. She never talked about Kayla or kept any photos around. That's why I didn't want any albums you found. I guess I figured if Jennifer wouldn't have wanted them, I shouldn't have taken them either. Out of respect, that sort of thing. But then after a couple of years, she started dreaming about Kayla. She'd dream of her ex-husband, Tom, too. Really bad nightmares. Jennifer never told me what was in the dreams, but she'd wake up screaming. We got her back on her old medications, but over time it only got worse. One morning, she was talking about hearing their voices, Kayla and Tom's, out in the woods, hearing them while she was awake. They wouldn't let her sleep, she said. They were calling out to her all the time, trying to get her to come out. But she knew it was wrong, scared her to death. One evening, I came home from my office and she was gone. Just gone. The back door was open, but all her stuff was still here. She didn't take a jacket or shoes or anything. And it's all woods up here, Felix, hundreds of miles of it. They searched for a month and found nothing. They investigated me, accused me of murdering my wife. I thought about killing myself. I swear I never hurt her, she just left. And she took my world with her. Then one day, I got a call from the sheriff's department. Some campers found Jennifer's remains about 40 miles away from her home, way up in the mountains. Henry paused to choke back tears. She'd been buried upside down with her legs sticking out of the ground. Some animal chewed them all up. Henry apologized once again and asked me not to return his call. I understood and sat there on the bed in silence for a moment, mourning all the people the imposter had brought to ruin. Although I tried to resist it, a horrible thought took root in my mind. I imagined Faye's slender legs caked with soil and jutting from the earth. Since learning of Lynn's mysterious pregnancy, I struggled to act normal around Faye. I kept lying my eyes averted whenever she was near, and hoped she wouldn't notice the fact that I was hiding something big from her. I had no idea why Lynn would be so secretive about the pregnancy, but she had endangered her own daughter's life to hide it. That night, I worked late into the night on my laptop and got into bed only when I felt certain that Faye was sleeping. Her body was stiff beneath the sheets. As I slid under the covers, I noticed her legs contorting in an awkward position. She rolled her head toward me and smiled with her eyes closed, then asked if Caleb was still awake. I hesitated. He's crying again, she went on. I'll get him. Faye tried to sit up, but I gently pushed her back down. She offered no resistance. He's fine, sweetie, I replied. She furrowed her brows and pursed her lips, as though she just realized I was lying. He's not here, she said. She gazed around the room, eyes still peacefully closed. Who is here, Faye? I asked. Do you know? She paused for a long moment, then let out a sigh. You. Who am I? Felix. And who are you? Faye. Her head cocked to the side. She listened for something. What do you hear? I asked. Is there someone else here? There's someone outside, she said, hanging something up in the trees. I wanted to get up and look out the window, but I feared it might wake Faye. Is it a dream catcher? I asked. Do you know what they're for? She smiled and laid her head back on the pillow. Her eyes were open now, rolled back into her head's only pale whites showed. I found one outside the old house, I said gently. I never told you. It was made with your hair, Faye. Did you make it? Do you know who makes them? Is it him? Faye's eyes rolled forward and her little green irises finally showed. Even in the dim light, I could see the fear that glinted in them. Her gaze snapped to the door that led to the hall, and she said, No, no. He's listening now. She began hyperventilating. He'll find out. He'll hear. It's okay, sweetie, I whispered, brushing her chin with my fingers. It's all right, just calm down. Faye's breathing slowed and her eyes fell shut, but her body still trembled. He's gonna kill you, she whispered. I saw him. He's gonna hang you up in the trees. Real soon. Just a little longer now. My phone vibrated on the dresser, igniting the room with a bluish glow. I reached for it, wondering if Nathan or Dr. Chauffeur was trying to get a hold of me. It was after 2 a.m. Whoever it was, I knew it was bad news. Lynn's voice came through the speaker. I'm outside, she said. Please let me in. The walk downstairs felt surreal, as if I were lost and wandering in a dream. My body was weak and my mind felt clogged with mud. The long months of anxiety and insomnia worked in concert to grind what remained of my spirit into dust. When I looked through the peephole and beheld Faye's mother standing there under the palm trees on our walkway, my head felt even lighter. I cracked the door open for a few inches. What the hell are you doing here? I whispered. I couldn't even begin to imagine what Lynn was up to, but her presence here, and the look on her face, signaled that she came bearing grave news. Took a red eye, she said in a mousy voice. Greg doesn't know I'm here. Not yet, at least. Satisfied that this wasn't some trick by our other unwanted guest, I pulled the door open. Lynn followed me inside, carrying only a modest suitcase and a grocery bag. "I'll wake Faye," I said, turning toward the stairs. Lynn nabbed my arm and spun me around. "We need to talk alone," she whispered. Her wide eyes screamed the point. We sat on the couch, where she quietly apologized to me for everything, for constantly being evasive, for lying, and for letting us stay in the cabin in the first place. I waved away her ramblings and demanded to know the purpose of her visit. Seeing my frustration, Lynn produced a photo album from the grocery bag. "Felix," she said, clutching it in her arms as if to protect it from me. "I told you the truth. Faye was about 5 years old when something happened at the cabin, when she developed her sleep disorder. But it isn't what the number 5 means." Lynn stared at me for a moment, struggling to force up the words she thought she'd never speak. The mask was off, and beneath it lay only a barren sadness she'd hidden for decades. My gaze fell into her lap where she opened the photo album. Its tattered spine groaned as if disturbed from centuries of rest. As she turned the pages, I realized it was actually a scrapbook, a very elaborate one that had taken years to construct. Inside lay photos, drawings, designs, letters, handprints, and even a garland of pressed flowers. There were pictures of Faye I'd never seen before. Her glowing smile poked out from beneath little strawberry locks in photo after photo. She looked exactly the way I imagined our daughter. "This is what I wanted to show you," Lynn said. "I don't know how to talk to Faye about it." I was so amazed by the elaborate craftsmanship and the touching photographs that her words almost didn't register with me. "You made this?" I asked. She flipped further into the scrapbook and revealed a few old pictures of herself in the later stages of pregnancy. The centerpiece of one of the pages was a Polaroid of Lynn, big-bellied and bearing a youthful smile, with little 5-year-old Faye curiously resting her ear on her mother's tummy. It was a priceless image, and one that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. The elegant script above it read, "Listen to him kick." "Faye and I put this together, actually," Lynn replied, "when she was little." It made sense. Faye was one of the most talented arts and crafts hobbyists I've ever known. She must have gotten it from her mom. So, I mumbled, unsure of how to broach the topic. "What happened?" Lynn looked over her shoulder to the darkened staircase. She feared her daughter would wake up. "His name was Christopher," she whispered. Her lips quivered as she spoke. She turned the page, revealing a photo of herself undergoing an ultrasound and giving a thumbs up. He was stillborn, a little under a month before the due date. I had no idea what to say. Between her loss and Tue's death, I had discovered the true poverty of the words, "I'm sorry." I remained silent, and the stillness in the room spoke for itself. "Placental abruption," she continued. "It's rare, but it happens." Lynn scooted closer to me and put the scrapbook on my lap, then grabbed my wrist. "Felix, Faye doesn't remember any of this. We've never spoken of it." I raised my finger to my lips, signaling her to be as quiet as possible. It wasn't just Faye who might be eavesdropping. "How is this possible?" I asked. 5 is old enough to remember something like this. I have memories from when I was 2. Lynn explained that the emergency occurred while Greg was out with the girls. The paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but the baby could not be saved. When she and Greg finally decided to break the news to their daughters that Christopher had died, Becca was heartbroken, but Faye didn't react. It was as if their words simply didn't register. Lynn would say, "Do you understand that Christopher is never coming home?" And Faye would respond, "Yes, Mommy," with a blank expression. This went on for weeks. Faye would occasionally ask about Christopher as though he'd be here soon, and then suddenly she'd forget all about him as if he never existed. She began to act out at school and would throw violent tantrums. A child psychologist warned that Faye was not handling the situation well, so Greg and Lynn decided to spend a few days with her at the cabin, in hopes of separating little Faye's mind from a heavy event. That's when it happened. Whatever it is that lives in the forest up there, up in the trees, or down in the hole, took notice of Faye. It found her fascinating, and it wanted to learn more about her, but her little brain shut down in terror when it got too close. After that day, Lynn said, Faye never spoke of Christopher again, and seems completely unaware he ever existed. We didn't know what else to do, so we played along. You've kept this from her all these years? I whispered. Her therapist wants us to try. Suddenly, Faye's voice erupted from behind us. Mom? My head snapped toward the sound. Faye stood there at the bottom of the stairs for God knows how long. I slammed the book shut. The air went out of the room. An agonizing moment of stillness ticked by, and during which we all exchanged looks of shock. A shitstorm was upon us. This much I knew. What's that? Faye asked gently, pointing to the book on my lap. I was dumbstruck. My limbs ceased responding to my brain's commands. Lynn jumped up between Faye and me. Sweetie, we need to talk, Lynn said, opening her arms for a hug. She tried to obscure Faye's view. Faye pushed her mother aside and walked over to the couch. Her fiery eyes locked onto the scrapbook and didn't blink. She reached down and tore it from my frozen hands. Then she opened it. The page she revealed bore a colorful cutout of the number 5. It was one of the final pages of the book. Her jaw trembled and her eyes became slick with welling tears. A look of excruciating pain fell over her face, and she cupped her mouth with a hand. Lynn reached out to assure her, but Faye evaded her and raced back upstairs to the bedroom, taking the book with her. Lynn tried for an hour to convince Faye to open the door, but it remained locked. During that time, Faye only spoke once, and she said, "Go home." Eventually, Lynn surrendered to her daughter's command and hugged me goodbye. I tried to get her to stay, but she seemed downright terrified of what her daughter might say when she finally emerged from the bedroom. I spent the rest of the night alone, too afraid to sleep. I feared the imposter might walk in my dreams, plucking bits of today's events like flowers in a meadow. By now, he had almost everything he needed to conquer Faye's mind. Faye never came out of the bedroom and wouldn't speak to me when I knocked. I played video games and watched TV shows to distract myself from the horrible knot of stress in my stomach. I texted with Tyler and Colin about the new developments, but the night wore on slowly, and each passing minute compounded my worry. What would this news do to Faye? Would it finally break her? As dawn crept over our home, I heard the bedroom door click. She was finally ready to let me in. Faye looked like a cemetery statue when I pushed the door open. She sat there in the bed perfectly still, with a scrapbook resting on her lap. I didn't speak, but the look in my eyes asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" The paths of 1,000 tears streaked her face. Her skin was pale, her eyes bloodshot, and they seemed wrung of all sorrow. A few tear-soaked locks of hair clung to her cheeks. "I remember now," Faye muttered. I stood there in the doorway, afraid to move. I had no idea how she'd react to the knowledge that I'd conspired with her mother to uncover the secrets of their past. This was new territory for both of us. I worried that Faye might try to hurt herself. "Mom and I spent all summer getting the nursery ready," she said, tracing a finger over one of the photos. "Dad was so excited that he was finally going to have a son, so we did a sports theme." I sat down beside her, quiet as a lamb. Talking to Faye in this state seemed a bit like handling a bomb, so I opted to just listen. She kept her hands pressed on the scrapbook as though she were feeling for a pulse, and closed her eyes in search of distant memories. A colorful 5 rested at the center of the page, overlaid with various photos. One depicted a baseball mural painted on the wall with 5 players, and another displayed a toddler onesie in the design of a baseball jersey. It bore the number 5. "I always wanted to be a big sister," Faye said. "I used to lay on my back in that room, staring up at the ceiling and wondering what kind of person he'd be, what he'd look like. I fantasized about all the adventures we'd have." I rested my hand on her back. Her skin blazed with warmth. "You'd have been the world's greatest big sister," I offered. "I'm sure of it." Faye turned a few more pages. Some were unfinished and the rest were blank. "I never got to see him," she replied. "That number was how I always thought of him. Christopher was going to be the 5th member of our family." We sat there for a long time. I listened quietly as a deluge of ancient memories surfaced within Faye. Sometimes she could barely speak. Other times she shook her head and said it was all a dream. Her denial rose and fell in waves. She grasped at all the faded images in her head and tried to describe them to me with great strain. A tomb had been unearthed from the deepest catacomb of her mind, and despite the pain it brought on her, Faye was excavating it. All I could do was hold her hand and listen. After our conversation, Faye asked to be alone. I nodded and kissed her forehead. As I left, I took out my phone to call Nathan, wanting to update him on all the new developments, but then realized it might be a bad idea. The more people who knew what the number 5 symbolized, the more opportunities the imposter would have to discover it. Nathan had told me about his dreams of the cabin and his father. Perhaps the creature was already inside his head. As I came down the stairs, my eyes fell on the TV stand as I suddenly remembered the package I'd hidden behind it the day before. Perplexed, I retrieved it and brought it to the dining room table. Lynn mentioned she would send a box out to me, but she ended up visiting instead, so who the hell sent this? I ripped the thing open and discovered a jar of something that looked like tea leaves. A little note attached to it read, "My friends, this is Kalea, the dream herb. It's used in native cultures in Mexico, but some folks in my community make tea from it to ward off nightmares and promote good sleep. In case you find what you're looking for, this may protect you. Nathan." I opened the jar and sniffed the leaves inside. They smelled bitter and earthy, and I guessed that the tea made from them probably tasted horrible, but I trusted Nathan's judgment. Perhaps it could shield us from the imposter's nightly intrusions, or at least prevent us from dreaming about Christopher in the scrapbook. Night eventually fell, and I slogged up the stairs, barely able to keep my eyes open. Faye had taken the day off of work and spent most of it texting with her family, probably getting everyone's version of the tragedy. Surprisingly, she was receptive to Nathan's gift and said she'd try anything to stop herself from having any more bad dreams. I brewed up enough of the tea for the both of us. The look on her face as I touched her lips confirmed my suspicion that it tasted awful. As she forced it down, I said, "Actually, I lied. We're sending you on a vision quest. This is going to be intense." She laughed, and it sounded like heaven. We slept like corpses that night. Colorful dreams washed over my mind, bringing with them a dizzying euphoria. I soared over fairy tale landscapes and met bizarre creatures. I wandered through a bright green forest whose trees stretched up to the sky and discovered Faye at the edge of a glowing pool of water. She stood there nude, fiery hair billowing in the gentle breeze, and beckoned me to follow. I watched as she slipped beneath its surface. Inviting warmth crept up my feet as I dipped them into the pool. The feeling rose up my body, almost to my neck, so pleasurable that my vision faded into a soothing darkness. But then a familiar cold licked my neck and ears. It pushed through my hair and forced its way into my nostrils, jarring me from the calmness of the dream. I rubbed the darkness from my eyes and opened them. A yellow light glimmered high up in the air against a black background. It cast a pale beam down to the ground, where beneath it a blurry figure stood. Faye? A sharp green thing poked against my bare arm. The sensation jerked me from my stupor. It was a palm frond. Short trees lined the sides of my vision, and a little stone path stretched out before me toward the yellow light. I stood on the walkway in front of our condo, looking out the street. It must have been very late because most of the lights of the other houses were off. A few crickets chirped, and in the distance sprinklers hissed. There, across the road, standing under a street lamp, was a man. His body glowed in the yellow light, but his face remained in shadow. Even with a hunched comportment, he looked about 7 feet tall. One of his shoulders arched noticeably higher than the other, and his head cocked to the side, reminiscent of the way Faye looked when she sleepwalked. The figure swirled a bony finger in the air as if conducting a choir of ghouls, then dropped his hand when he realized I had woken up. It seemed that the tea had stopped me from dreaming of the awful things I'd learned about little Christopher, but it did nothing to prevent the imposter from seeing whatever came into my mind while I slept. For the second time now, the monster led me right to him with my own dreams. "I thought I told you to fuck off," I roared. I don't know what possessed me, but I strode toward him, fully prepared for round 2. To my surprise, instead of clawing me to death right there in the street, the figure turned and ran. Against my better judgment, I gave chase, screaming at the top of my lungs to stay away from my family and my house. He moved faster than I could, even with his freakish limp. I'd always imagined the imposter as some hellish mockery of a man, but the longer I watched him move, the more I realized he was more of a patchwork of things. My mind tried to comprehend what exactly I was looking at. I envisioned a rail-thin creature made of oily black parts, squeezing into the costume of a human and graciously lurking around in it. His movements looked animalistic, his strides far too long. He wheezed the night air like an old accordion, and the stench that dragged behind him singed my nose. It smelled like wildfire. "No woods for you to fuck around in out here," I screamed. Lights came on in houses all around me as I chased the creature. He practically galloped, and he was always 20 feet ahead. Hang on. One second. Okay, sorry about that. Sometimes when my sweet mate is in the bathroom, when I hear them, I always think it's someone knocking on my door. I chased him down for 2 blocks. He ran it a few turns and finally bounded over a chain-link fence into the nearby community park, where there were no lights. Unable to climb the fence, I ran all the way around and found him standing perfectly still in the grass. Only the hideous silhouette was visible. The figure stood there in an empty field, shrouded in the night, gazing up at the moon. One of his hands reached into the sky, twitching wildly, and the other hung at his side like a gnarled driftwood. My adrenaline faded, and I realized how far away we were from help. Out here, no one would hear me scream, but I approached the figure still, committed to ending this nightmare tonight, one way or another. As I neared him, the creature issued a rumbling growl. The sound was so deep I felt it in my ribcage as much as I heard it. I stopped in my tracks, but still managed to push out the words. "You will never have her. Never. Go back to that goddamn mountain and bury yourself in a mine." The figure growled again, then gurgled up a wet laugh. "What is your name?" he asked in my voice. He'd been practicing. The impression was perfect now. "May I come in?" "Open the door, Faye." I didn't know how much human speech he could truly comprehend, but my tone must have communicated whatever my words could not. "You will leave us alone and go back to the mountain," I said louder than before. "Faye will never be yours." The imposter emitted the shrieking of an infant. The sound petrified me, not because of its accuracy, but because my brain refused to match the noise to a person this large. Then he said in the voice of a child, "You go down in the hole. That's where he'll put you." "Look at me, you piece of shit," I said. I tried to sound menacing, but my flight instinct was beginning to kick in. There was little doubt the imposter sensed it too. Then he said something I did not expect. The words felt like a fist bashing against my skull, and upon hearing them, everything started to spin. "Tell me about the child, Felix." Nathan's voice wafted effortlessly from his throat. "Tell me about the child." Before I could speak, the imposter whirled around and glared at me. My knees came straight out from under my body, and I collapsed into the wet grass. Staring down at me, boring into my soul with lidless eyes, was the face of Nathan. My friend, my protector, the son of a man who had given his life to help me. Now his skin was hard and bruised, his scalp flayed, his eyes tormented. His features didn't quite fit the skull they'd been stretched over, and the whole mess was propped up by a body that rattled with loose, collected bones. A slimy black liquid dribbled out of the mouth and spattered onto my chest when he cackled. As the creature loomed over me, a familiar little pouch bobbled around his neck, emptied of its former contents, and now overflowing with severed fingers. The creature spoke a phrase in the language of Tway's people, the same one Nathan had uttered over the phone to make Faye sick, and I began vomiting profusely as I lay there on the ground. Tell me about the child, he said once more. The lips spread, and an expression of malevolent joy, barring the rotten maw of a long dead wolf. Nathan's calm voice seeped out of it. Let me speak to the one who followed you home. I gasped for air, but couldn't impel my body to move. The creature took a few steps toward me, and I slammed shut my eyes, expecting to feel those hideous fangs in my neck. Instead, I heard his footsteps approach, and then recede in the opposite direction. I smelled his stench as he passed over me. When I opened my eyes, he was already in the distance, moving quickly back to my neighborhood, toward my house. Followed you home, he repeated, voice echoing in the cold night air. Followed you home, followed you home. When I was 3 years old, my parents took my brother and me to Yosemite for a vacation. We were joined by 2 other families that my mother knew from work, so we all stayed in a giant cabin together. At some point during our stay, one of the other kids came down with some kind of stomach bug. It didn't take long for the illness to spread to all the children, and eventually I began vomiting uncontrollably. My father could not hide his disgust and refused to come near me. This made me cry a lot. My mother came to the rescue and consoled me, but the damage was done. My dad's horrified expression imprinted itself in my mind forever and taught me that there is something to fear about being sick. I'm 28 years old now, and I've spent years of my life being paranoid about throwing up. Emetophobia controls much of my existence. It makes me afraid to share someone's drink, afraid to eat without washing my hands, afraid to get on roller coasters, to fly in planes, to try new things, or go to new places. At some point after decades of living with this phobia, I've almost forgotten what causes me to regard all those things with fear. The possibility of vomiting becomes subconscious. I don't really think about it anymore. I simply fear everything that could cause me to be sick, and yet I have no immediate explanation for why I'm afraid anymore. I just am. That possibility no longer lingers at the precipice of my conscious thoughts, but the imposter found it anyway. He reached deep into my nightmares and pulled out what terrifies me the most. He brought it out and used it against me. Repeating Nathan's spiritual purge didn't just disable me in the field, it was a reminder of his remarkable power to turn my own flawed humanity upon me, a reminder that he was planning to make me suffer in the most personal of ways. The imposter was designing a personal hell for me, and it was nearly ready to drag me down into it. And so the world collapsed on me. I lay there on the ground, puking my guts out, knowing Faye was asleep and unguarded, while a terrible being strode toward her through the dark. He beckoned her in every voice she knew, calling out her name in all of his stolen tongues. He whispered things that would make her happy. He made her promises, he begged her for help, and mimicked the cries of children. He capitalized on her innate motherly instincts and her buried memories, and on the vulnerability of her unconscious state. And all I could do was stagger around and wait for the thrum of my death-gripped heart to subside. After a few blurry moments, the first light of morning poured into my vision, illuminating my way out of the park. My pulse recovered from its frenzy, and the numbness of my limbs faded. The acrid taste in my mouth for once didn't paralyze me. I tore through the streets to get back to the house. I had no plan. Many lights were on in the homes that lined our street, and the sky over the eastern foothills blazed dawn red. A few of the neighbors had heard me shouting and were now standing in their driveways with cell phones or flashlights in hand. I ran past them, telling them to look out for a prowler, and ducked into the walkway of our condo. I hoped their watchful gazes would discourage the creature from making another appearance. The front door sat wide open. I couldn't remember if I'd left it that way while sleepwalking, but I assumed that the creature was somewhere inside the house. I entered, squinting through the darkness and calling out to Faye. The bed was empty. Its sheets lay across the floor as if Faye had been dragged from them. I shouted her name and searched the rooms, growing more frantic with each passing second. When I couldn't find her anywhere, I leapt down the stairs, hoping to catch one of the neighbors and ask if they'd seen her. Just as I reached the front door, a person's silhouette appeared in the corner of my eye. It was Faye. She stood in front of the sliding glass door that led out to the backyard. She remained perfectly still, except her hand, which gripped the door handle so tightly it trembled. Thank God, I sighed, slamming the front door shut and ensuring it was locked. Faye muttered something, but I couldn't hear it. All I could see was the featureless outline of her body and her breath that fogged the glass in front of her. Are you all right? I asked, moving toward her. I saw him, she whispered. The door frame shuddered under the strength of her grip. He was here. Where is he now? I asked, looking over her shoulder and surveying the yard. I saw him, she said again. Faye backed into me and stumbled. I caught her before she fell. She looked up into my eyes with a panic I knew all too well. She'd finally met her biggest fan. I saw his face, she whispered, pointing a shaking finger at the glass. I saw his face. There, streaked across the glass where she'd been standing, was an oily black handprint. Faye and I forced ourselves to stay awake through the next few hours. We communicated only with pen and paper for fear that the creature might still be listening somewhere outside. During that time, we heard 3 distinct sets of footprints on the roof and 2 different knocks on the door. Children laughed all around the perimeter of the house. Occasionally, there were long periods of silence, but even then I could not relax. The image of Nathan's eyes, staring into me with otherworldly malice, haunted my thoughts. The ache of his loss gnawed at my heart so hungrily that I could not even speak it to Faye. We waited until the sun climbed high in the morning sky. As the noises faded and the world brightened, Faye went to the window to look outside. I've got an idea, she said, confidence rising in her voice. I know what to do. Faye's new boss was generous enough to give her the day off, so we had a long weekend to set her plan into motion. We sipped Nathan's awful tea after concluding that it did more good than harm, and Faye spent her time furiously drawing, journaling, and texting with her mom and sister. She explained little, but I could tell by her demeanor that everything she did had a purpose. Angela called me to set up her visit, and she seemed genuinely disturbed by the fact I refused to talk about her situation over the phone. I asked her to bring Sage, which she replied, I'm not that kind of Indian. Over the next 2 days, I periodically heard Faye crying in private. She certainly entered some kind of mourning process, long delayed by years of denial, and I now bore witness to the lifelong impact of her loss. She sobbed for hours on end and stared at the scrapbook all the while. Never have I seen a person in so much pain, but she assured me that she'd be all right and simply asked that I trust her. I obliged. Faye knew herself better than anyone, even me, and seemed confident in the ability to rid of that shadow that loomed over our lives, and so I put my faith in her judgment. I cried too. Nathan never answered any of the 1,000 calls I made to his phone that weekend, neither did Ranger Pike. My heart was certain of Nathan's ghastly fate, but my brain still had to know for sure. The wait was agonizing. Finally, on Saturday night, my phone rang. I was in the middle of heating soup for Faye. When I saw that it was the Ranger, a sudden dread washed over me. The phone felt like a 20-pound brick in my hand. Hello, I said. It came out almost a plea. William skipped all the pleasantries and said, You better sit down. Just tell me, I begged. Just tell me. My heart pounded so hard it shook my vision. William cleared his throat and tried to speak with composure, but I could hear the sorrow in his voice. We got a call from one of Nathan's relatives, he said. Told us he'd been missing a few days. Thought he went camping with his buddies, but none of them knew where he was. On my route yesterday morning, I dropped by the Spencer cabin. There was a long silence, which told me more than words could say. A jolt of desperate rage flashed through me. I warned Nathan not to go up there. We got city cops everywhere up here now, William continued. Whole mountain shut down. Weren't no bear this time. They're up here looking for a murderer. The Ranger heard my muffled sobs. That's enough then, he said. They were my friends too, Felix, family to me. Tell me, I repeated. I have to know. I can't, Felix. It just don't make any sense yet. Maybe if we wait for an official... Tell me what you know, I demanded. William sighed. Something happened up there at the cabin. They did something to him. I don't understand it. Our coroner up here's deferring to the boys in Denver, so we gotta wait some more. He ain't ever seen anything like it. It's horrible, just horrible. The news singed every nerve in my body. Pain radiated up my stomach across every limb. My scalp tingled. Fuzzy gray static began to form around my vision. I felt like passing out. I called for backup right when I got there, William said. Went inside, found a hell of a puzzle. Bathroom window been forced open. Don't get why, though, because the front door was unlocked. That's how he came in. Seemed like 2 people been in there recently. Bedroom door was locked from the inside, but the door leading from that room out to the back was open, wide open. Somebody been staying in that room for a few nights. Food and all kinds of weird shit in there. Some dead rabbits, a chipmunk, or something too. We found Nathan's satellite phone on the couch in the living room. Your number was the last one he dialed, Felix. The static pressed closer to the center of my vision. I never got a missed call, I replied. I never heard from Nathan at all. I called him 100 times. Might not have gone through, the ranger replied. I found his buck knife jammed into the wall outside of the bedroom door. He'd been carving symbols and words all over the house, took pictures of them, but nobody in his community had ever seen anything like them before. Specialist at Boulder says some of them are Hopi and Zuni words. But Nathan didn't speak those languages. Neither did Twe. Nobody on the reservation does. There was a big carving of a dream catcher on the outside of the bedroom door. A non-lethal amount of blood splattered on the carpet and the wall there in the hallway. If that ain't weird enough, on the inside of the bedroom door he found little marks everywhere, like someone been pounding and scratching on it. William explained to me what the sheriff and his men hypothesized, that Nathan had been sitting on the floor in the hall for a day, maybe even 2. Someone was in the bedroom, but the door remained locked. Whoever was in there it was possible that he and Nathan were having some sort of conversation. At no point was the electricity or heat functioning in the cabin because it had been shut off after I was rescued on my second visit. This meant that however long Nathan had stayed, he remained in the dark and near freezing weather each night. The K9 team found 2 pairs of tracks leaving the cabin, one from the back door of the bedroom and the other from the front door. They both headed into the woods across the field. The tracks joined together, indicating that although the 2 people had left the house separately, they walked side by side into the woods. They found Nathan's body approximately a quarter mile in, buried upside down with his legs erupting from the soil at the knee. Upon exhumation, it was discovered that his face and scalp had been flayed. There were deep lacerations in his back that appeared to be claw marks, and carvings on his arms that looked self-inflicted. The unofficial cause of death, however, was suffocation. He'd been buried alive. If it is true that we have souls, I felt mine die in that moment. I remained in the kitchen speechless, watching as Faye's soup boiled over and splattered across the stove. You ever go down into that cellar? William asked, shaking me from my stupor. No, it was locked. Must have been, he replied. Both them doors had been ripped off. Whatever was inside is gone now, taken. The rest of the night slipped by in silence. If the imposter made any noise outside it, I was oblivious to it. Faye slept soundly thanks to the effect of Nathan's final gift. I sat at the living room table with a single lamp on, wistfully remembering the warmth of Twe's smile and the liveliness of his eyes against his weather-beaten face. I recalled the feeling of camaraderie that Nathan had always made me feel. And the day we met, he treated me like a brother. The wicked grins I donned while warned by the imposter still haunted me, but my heart knew those were petty torments. They faded and gave way to the memories I had of the real Twe and Nathan. Finally here for one of the story readings. You look different? Do I look different? I don't know if I had this or not when you came. I feel like I did, but maybe not. I didn't know what to do. I went online and made the largest donation I could afford to their community to help cover some of the costs of their funeral ceremonies. Afterward, I wrote a long letter to the both of them. I intended to read it at their place of burial someday, when all this was over. For now, we had a pest to eradicate. Last time I was here, you had a black turtleneck type thing. Oh yeah, so this was the PNG that I had commissioned. Anyway, so you came in at the worst time because that was the last part that I'm reading for today. Because we are 94% of the way done with this book, meaning that next Wednesday at the same time will be the final Stolen Tongues reading. So we'll be finishing it next week. Yeah, so actually, because we are done, I'm gonna turn on my nicer music and move over to my just chatting. Yeah, so we're really close to the end now, which is really awesome. So we're gonna finish next week, and then after we're done with the book, we're gonna hop back into probably reading some scary Reddit stories again before I started doing this. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you guys are watching on YouTube and you enjoyed, please consider subscribing. It takes 2 seconds and it's completely free, so you can always unsubscribe later. We're gonna see if there's any friends that we can raid today, but while I'm doing that, I will see you guys tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for some Counterside. So I will see you guys then. Lizzie is playing Overwatch 2 right now, so we're going to raid Lizzie. So I will see you guys tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard for Counterside. Thanks so much for watching, guys. See you then. Bye.